I'm in historic Steveston, and I'm having a little walk here. I was very lucky on the timing of my trip to be able to come here during the spring blossoms, and I couldn't pass up this little walk here to give you a sense of just how gorgeous it is. These are cherries, and when I was in high school 30 years ago, this was a pretty undeveloped area, and there was certainly no cherry trees here like this. And kind of walking under a canopy and taking it in, just give you a sense of how gorgeous this is. You know, one of the things about woke ideology is there's a real lack of gratitude and appreciation for the beautiful things in the world. The world is made up of, victims and oppressors, and it's a narrative that doesn't leave a lot of room for appreciation, and neither self-respect nor respect for others. It deeply divisive, and I just, to be honest, I talked in another video about my childhood and my upbringing and the kinds of experiences that I had. And as I figured out what, was able to put labels to that and start to try and grapple with the impacts of abuse in my life, I went through a period of time where I felt that way too, where where I felt like a victim, and I wore the victim identity, and really like my pain on my sleeve, and I partied too hard, and I drank too much, and lots of people like me go through periods of self-sabotage. I did that too. And people, it's funny, I figured this out for some reason. When people used to ask me how I was doing, I'd go into a list of gripes and grievances. And one day, I realized that people were recoiling from that. It's not a great conversation starter to talk about how shitty things are, how not great the circumstances are and things I'm struggling with. And I took to answering the question with how are you doing? To saying I'm very well. How are you? And remarkably, that changed my world. Just figuring that little thing out. I'm very well. And saying thank you for all the things that were going right instead of counting all the things that were going wrong. Now, we live in a world, I'm back here in Vancouver. I cannot believe the kind of development that's happened here. The architecture, the infills, Steveston Village used to be just this little tiny strip. And maybe I'll get a chance to walk down Chatham Street and catch some of this video, or Moncton Street. Some of these places you've seen if you watch television and movies, because this is a film location. At least the village is, and it's really, really spectacular. I'm looking across the bay. I'll probably get a chance to give you some background here, but I can see Vancouver Island from here, across the ocean, and smell the water, and there's fishing boats off to my right. The years that I was going through divorce, which some people can reach a point in a relationship and they can realize, hey, this isn't working, and we need to do something different, and we need to figure out how to move on. And a small percentage of people don't know how to handle that, and handle it very badly. And my divorce was particularly acrimonious, in spite of my attempts to just manage and be gracious and to try and make things work on the other side. They never did. Some people talk about co-parenting with shared parenting agreements, and what I ended up with was parallel parenting. And through a period of time, through my divorce, and my father had cancer at the time, and we'd been estranged, and carried an awful lot of stress and anxiety, and I was having obsessive thoughts and ruminations and conjectures and speculations and catastrophizing. And I wasn't sleeping. I didn't sleep well for years. And the doctor tried to put me on antidepressants, and they made me feel dumb and slow. And I went off them because I didn't like feeling dumb and slow. And then one night I just started counting all the things that I was grateful for. I was grateful for my wife Jennifer, my wife Jennifer, and our kids. I had a couple of colleagues that were really supportive, some friends back home. My father-in-law, who has since passed, was a great mentor and inspiration to me. I'm thankful for my health, thankful for all the experiences that I'd had. And when you start counting your blessings, start counting the things that are important. Start counting the small moments with gratitude. That changes our experience of the world. When we go through the world and we're just counting all the things that are wrong, counting all the things that are difficult, especially when we think that we're entitled to something that we don't have, it generates a lot of negative feelings. So I've taught my kids over the years, if you want a formula for unhappiness, just have a look at what you want, the difference between what you want and what you currently have, and multiply that by how badly you want it. And that's the formula. That's a math formula for unhappiness. And there's a very different approach. And it comes from, it's in multiple religions in the world, but it comes from a number of different spiritualities. You don't start from an aspirational hope or an idea of what you should have and what the world owes you and what the government should do and what your parents should do and all of that. You start from the presupposition or the idea that we have nothing, that we come out of the earth, we live this life, and we're going to return to the earth, and nobody owes us a damn thing. There's a Buddhist idea of non-attachment, and it comes from a notion. The first noble truth of the Buddha was that all life is suffering. That's the foundation of the Buddhist philosophy, is that existence is suffering. And he came to that conclusion when he escaped his father's palace. He was sheltered and protected and surrounded by nothing but opulence and fun and women and everything that he could have ever wanted. And he escaped the palace with a friend, and the friend took him to a nearby village. And as they approached the village, they passed an old woman who was walking with a cane, and she was bent over with crippling arthritis and osteoporosis. And he said to his friend, "What is that?" And of course, his friend had lived in the real world and knew what it was. And he said, "Well, Shakyamuni, that's old age. That happens to all of us." And the Buddha was, this is before the Buddha became the Buddha. He was quite fascinated. And on another excursion, another escape into town, they passed a beggar, and he had leprosy. And his hands and his face were deteriorating, and it was just an awful sight. And he said to his friend, "What is that?" His friend said, "My lord, that's sickness. People get sick. That's a human condition." And Shakyamuni, the Buddha, had never seen this before. He'd been so sheltered, he'd never imagined that people could get sick. And on the next excursion, on the way to the village, they passed a corpse in the ditch. And he said to his friend, "What is that?" And his friend said, "My lord, that's death. That's all of our fates." And from that experience, the Buddha developed his first noble truth, that all life is suffering. And he came to the conclusion, after meditation, long meditation, that there is a solution to suffering. And that suffering is it's caused by attachment. It's caused by our expectations and our beliefs about the way the world is supposed to be. And the more we attach our beliefs and our expectations to the way the world is supposed to be, the more the world doesn't conform. There's an old joke, if you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans. And so he said that the solution to suffering is to release attachments. It's to accept existence as it is, for what it is, in all of its horrors, all of its beauties. These people who think that they're entitled to some sort of utopia that's been stolen from them are foolish. They fall into the same human trap that we always fall into. They've completely forgotten about gratitude and grace and reverence. Hui. I think we need, and I've been giving this some considerable thought since I've been here in Vancouver, the woke, the cultural Marxists, the race Marxists, the whatever you want to call them, all they have is a list of complaints about the world. All the grievances. That's what they base their whole philosophy on. And there's an expression or an idea. Take it from defensive driving school. But this applies to all areas of our life. If we focus on something, focus our attention on something, we tend to get it. And if we focus our attention on things we don't want, that's what we tend to get. So our brains have a really hard time with processing negatives. So we get this language around, anti-racism and decolonization and, the focus on all the problems of the world. And the idea of these woke bureaucrats, right? They're a bureaucratic capture of our institutions, and their job is to come in and point out all the problems. Everyone's focusing on all the problems, and we can debate whether or not those problems exist, but that's what they focus on. And I asked the question of my provincial member of Parliament before I left Ottawa. Why are we focusing on the things we don't want? If you want to solve the problem of crime, for example, it would be completely antithetical to a leftist view that we would increase the amount of police, increase the number of laws that make crimes, and increase the size of our jails and money that we spend on jails. We would want to put money into creating the kind of future that we hope for. But the woke politics is like a police force and a moral set of judgments that it's like hunting down thought criminals, and their goal is to increase this bureaucracy. They're trying to build, with Bill 67 in Ontario, a whole layer of bureaucracy only geared to ferret out problems and punish wrongdoers. Well, bloody hell. What do we actually want as a society? You know, in 1982, we created a constitution. It's the basic rights. These are the baseline rights. But we haven't had a real conversation about the kind of society that we want to live in. I say we. But, you know, the American Declaration of Independence was an aspirational document. They clearly knew that they didn't have those states. They weren't in that place where all men were created equal. They weren't in the place that, you know, we view these truths as self-evident, but those were aspirational. They created the Constitution and created the United States in order to move towards a more perfect union. We haven't done that in Canada, but I think if we want real change, okay, yeah, maybe let's acknowledge some of the historic problems. I'm here in British Columbia, and this land was once occupied, and these rivers once fished by Indigenous people here. And there's been all kinds of traumas due to the advance of modernity. And people try and say this is whiteness or this is colonialism. Look, this is technology and human ingenuity and desire for growth and expansion. And it's the product of families, of individuals over time saying, I want to make my kids' life better than mine. And we in the West have been particularly possessed by growth and the drive for growth. And this has created the world that we have, this modernity. If we didn't have, I mean, we could ask ourselves, well, where would we be without it? What is it we want? What kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of communities do we want to have? What kind of relationships do we want to have? What kind of education system do we want to have? What do we want to get out of education for our kids? What's the product? Not the kids, the product, but what kind of tools do we want to give them so that they can create and be a force for creating the kind of world that we aspire to? That's the kind of lessons that we need in our public schools. That's the kind of thinking that we need in our universities. That's the kind of processes we need in our organizations. How do we make things better? And yes, there's going to be problems along the way and we deal with them. But this ideology that's grabbing people's consciousness, well, hooking them into mental traps and really bad ideas. God Saad calls them parasitized minds, parasitic thoughts. What do? We need to articulate what our potential is. We need to aspire to something bigger. And it's one of the challenges that we face, I think, in the people who are gathering together in both in above the fold groups like FAIR, the Foundation of Intolerance Against Racism, and groups that are secret. There are secret societies and dissident networks forming in Canada, many of them. Dissident academics, dissident teachers, dissident employees, dissident healthcare workers. They can't talk openly, but they're creating these underground networks trying to figure out how to push back. And we ran into the same trap of what is it we don't want? We're fighting what we don't want, but what do we want? Maybe that's a question I'll ask in the Sweat Lodge. Tomorrow I head for Vancouver Island, taking the ferry to Victoria, talking with a couple of organizers and networkers and a couple old friends. And then I've started the conversation to go and visit my friend Joe Thorne. He's an elder knowledge keeper with the Wolf Clan of the Nachanluk people in Port Alberni, and he's a school trustee. And they're doing some interesting things there in the Cowichan region. I'll be learning more about. what kind of world do we want to create? Make sure you like and subscribe, because as much as I'm going to gather information about all the challenges that we're having in our institutions because of this problem, I want to try and articulate some of the things that we can create as human beings and as communities to replace this, all this conflict and tension and fear and judgment.